This is Stigma, where we talk with leaders from many industries about how mental health and addiction have impacted their lives. Many people suffer silently from mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma. They never seek help because of stigma. In this podcast, host Stephen Hayes and his guests share their stories of recovery in order to encourage others to do the same. Here's Stephen.
Welcome back to the Stigma Podcast. I've spent a lot of time lately thinking about mental health in this time of COVID and everything that's going on with isolation as we come out of this period, hopefully. I've been thinking a lot about authenticity and vulnerability, and today's guest is going to really kind of help us frame that conversation. His name's Jesse Stern, and he founded a nonprofit called KoreVoices, which is a community that encourages truth and compassion and support against loneliness and bullying, support for mental health. And so I'm really excited to get into this conversation with Jesse. So without further ado, Jesse, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you.
So I wanted to have you share a little bit about yourself, your bio, your background with our audience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is not originally in the mental health area at all. It's really in journalism, where I spent essentially my 20s for about 10 years working with networks like National Geographic and Discovery Channel, filming their longer format documentaries across Asia and the Middle East. So I was actually based in Asia doing that work, and that meant that I would spend a couple of weeks or a couple of months filming around a certain topic. That was oftentimes current events driven stuff. That could have been conflict. It could have been natural disasters. It could have been, say, wildlife at times. But it was really looking at social issues. And what that meant was really oftentimes going to a place when that place was in the news for a certain reason. And oftentimes that was, kind of where the world was focused. And for me, that really meant landing in very uncertain circumstances and needing to tell a story. And I think for me, that became really important work because I felt like I was allowing people to have a voice where they might not normally have one. And these were stories that the world really needed to hear. So I think the goal there was that you make a difference, or at least you hope to make a difference. And I think, maybe sometimes you do, or at least, that's the hope that you do. But it's incredibly challenging work. You're oftentimes in very unpredictable places and circumstances. But for me, I was extremely passionate about it because I got to go to places that not many people got to go to and tell these stories that, once again, I just really felt everybody needed to hear and the world needed to kind of know what was going on. And for me, it was a great experience, but also I had done that for quite a while. And I think at a certain point, I realized that I wanted to move back to the States, and I hadn't lived here for nearly 10 years. So that was a little bit of an adjustment, but I think more than anything, what it was for me was sort of realizing that there were certain societal issues that felt like they were at play when I arrived back here. And most immediately, I guess, what I felt was that the way that people were treating one another felt different, and I think we can say a little bit colder. And I saw that clearly in the realm of dating and relationships. I had just heard so many stories from friends and friends of friends, and I felt like it was those stories that we were all sort of discussing on text messages or at dinner tables that really I was like, wow, like what is going on here? People are, really experiencing some bizarre stuff that I just didn't really remember hearing. And I kind of wanted to, I think, allow people to have that conversation in a bigger way. And I guess that sort of brings me back in some ways to, we can just say more broadly, the storytelling work that I was doing previously. But I said, okay, let's find a way to allow people to have this conversation and tell these stories that really seem unique right now and quite extraordinary. So what I did was I started an Instagram account that allowed people to anonymously submit the stories that they were going through in the realm of dating and relationships.
What's that account called?
That's called My Date, My Story. And at first I thought that it was going to be these, sort of funny first date stories or Tinder stories or whatever, the kind of stuff that I was hearing. And I guess that's kind of what it was in the beginning. But it didn't take long for that to become different. And the stories that people started submitting were much more serious. And they were around their longer term relationships, and they were around the stuff that they were going through, say, after dating for a couple of years. Maybe they had been cheated on. They didn't know if they should marry this person. The stuff, the more real stuff is what people started to submit. And around the same time as that stuff started getting posted, people started asking questions. And it was really kind of around like, hey, what do you guys think? Does anybody have any ideas of what I should do? And this community started to build that was incredibly positive. And it was really a lot of people saying, hey, I've been through this. Here's what happened. Hey, I'll be your friend. Let's talk. And I didn't really expect this. This is sort of something that caught me off guard because, first of all, just the content on its own was not what I expected, but also the positivity that, and part of that, I guess, is down to kind of how you build a digital community. But so much of what we know about social media has to do with trolling and negativity. And this was just overwhelmingly positive. And as it sort of moved forward and the following started to grow, the conversation started to broaden as well. And over time, what's really happened is that there's multiple different accounts on Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube. There's a website with a lot of contributing writers, and it's now really all broadly under the umbrella of mental health. So there are now over 200,000 people who are having these conversations around all sorts of issues to do with, say, depression, anxiety, loneliness, bullying, relationships, family issues. And what's really occurred is this sort of ecosystem has developed where people feel less alone. And I think that's probably more than anything what I've learned is that people feel very lonely, but realizing that there are people who are experiencing the same thing that they are gives a lot of people hope. I think that a lot of people might not have friends or family that they can talk to about mental health issues. And that can be due to a broad variety of different reasons. But to feel alone and to feel like you're the only one, I think is overwhelming. So when all these people are suddenly saying like, hey, that's me too, or that happened to my friend, and these other conversations start to take place, it feels like that really wins the day. And that's really what I've seen through building KoreVoices.
So let me back up for just a second. Why is this conversation so negative? And is this a US thing? Is this a global thing? Is it a online versus in person? What's going on? Why are people treating people so poorly?
My initial sort of hypothesis before I started this was, I think that like the dating apps are the problem. I was like, when people suddenly have like unlimited choice of people that they can go out with, and, they don't necessarily have like a mutual social connection, people maybe, are going to be who they actually are. And they're not just going to be who they think they should be because it might get back to their friend that they ghosted this person or that they, did this terrible thing. That was sort of my hypothesis. The answer to, I guess, why it's so much more negative, I don't know overall. I do feel like there is just overall a component, though, beyond, say, the apps that just has to do with sort of tech, that has to do with social media, that has to do with a lot of the changing dynamics based on what people are putting out into the world, the version of themselves that they're putting out into the world, how that makes other people feel. I think that we're just living overall in a very different time. And a lot of this is relatively new. So as a society, we're still very much learning how to react to that, how to adapt to that. And I think what we oftentimes see is this sort of initial fallout from all of that.
Yeah. And so how did the Instagram account, which I just followed, by the way,
thank you.
How did the me and 120,000 other people. So how did the Instagram account turn into this community you've built around KoreVoices, and what is that community today?
Yeah, so over the last number of years, this community has become a really important place for a lot of people at different times. There are some users that will be on, say, that account or the other accounts for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then maybe they'll drop off and then maybe they'll come back. And that's really what it's for. It's meant to be there for when you need it. And maybe that's because you want to tell your story. Maybe it's because you want to comment on other people's stories. Maybe it's because you want to make friends. There's a lot of different motivations there, but it's there for a time. And if somebody needs it, and maybe that's not always the case, but I do see this sort of ebb and flow of people coming on and off the accounts. And that's really positive because that means that it's a place, it's a resource for people when they need it. What I do see happen is a lot of people who were very isolated. And I think a lot of the people in the KoreVoices community are somewhat isolated, maybe because, they might just not have that many friends, or maybe in the country that they're in, they can't have certain conversations openly. And what's happened is a lot of sort of smaller groups have developed, smaller group chats of people that are going through something similar. And that's for them like almost this 24/7 digital support group that's private. And they check in and they'll say, hey guys, here's what happened today. Here's how I'm feeling today. And everybody else can chime in and say, oh, here's my advice. Here are my thoughts. Let's talk. So for a lot of people, it's become an incredibly meaningful part of their life. And that's really how KoreVoices has developed over time.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good content on the site. I mean, like good advice. It seems like there's a couple different types of, content. There's user generated. There's these shares from Instagram and from other places. And then it seems like you guys have a bunch of editorial you've done where you've put a lot of great content up here about, stress and how to deal with it and how a hobby can help and burnout. And that it looks like you guys have done a lot of work. Is this a nonprofit or a for-profit? Like how are you able to do all this?
Yeah, this is a nonprofit. So, so we operate through donations. And also a lot of what I would say is what's happened here is I kind of had the initial idea, but I could only go where they would take it, meaning they really drive the content and they've driven the arc of that content. I'll ask questions. Hey, what do you guys think? Should we launch another account about this or that? And they'll sort of help to guide it. And so much of where this has gone, with every new account that launches, it's with their sort of thoughts and guidance around that because it has to appeal to them and it has to be something that they want to engage with. What you mentioned, for example, on the website is that there are a fair amount of longer form articles. And that was really born out of this realization that, wow, a lot of these people don't necessarily want to write shorter length content that will just go on social media because that sort of has to ultimately be pretty condensed. They want to write longer content. So that was just born out of like, oh, okay, well, how do we do that? And, okay, would some of you guys want to, write articles? Would you, want to have a byline? Would you want to be on the website? So that's been really positive because that's longer form stuff. And that's also, really always has a message of hope or something that people can take away from it. So it's kind of interesting. I guess one of the things that I've learned through just building this digital community is that it's very much a sort of learning experience for me, constant learning experience for me based on what I'm seeing and based on what people are commenting on and trends, trends in the news. So, right now, for example, I'm seeing about 80% of the submissions and stories are related to coronavirus. And it's really just this incredible moment. Whereas like before, it was much more broad and people going through different things at different times. But I'm just seeing so much content because the world is really somewhat unified around this one specific thing, which is extraordinarily unique. I think, what I would say has been, really interesting is to see these issues that people are going through, say around family issues, uncertainty about loved ones being safe, losing family members, uncertainty about the future, financial strains, things like that. Obviously, being in isolation is a really new thing for everybody. So what does that mean for your mental state? And that's really challenging. On the other hand, I see a lot of positivity as well. I see resiliency. I see people finding strength within themselves, coming up with ways to manage and overcome this. So I'm seeing a lot of different messages with everything that people are going through with coronavirus right now. And this is sort of like a new moment for KoreVoices to sort of look at how we, can sort of best serve the community through this.
So where do you see the platform going? Or is it something that you're putting a lot of time and effort into, getting more people to join the platform, or advertising it, or creating content? Like where's your primary focus, and kind of where do you see it going in the next few years?
I think that, well, up until recently, I was really sort of driving towards adding a sort of in-person element to this. So maybe not having it just digital, but adding ways that people could actually meet in person. And I was sort of well on my way to kind of figuring that out. I think that now, just due to coronavirus, I'm still very interested in doing that. But I think that I'm just going to put that off for a while and now really kind of focus on building just the digital side until that feels a little bit more realistic, that people are going to be wanting to go out and meet. And, hopefully at some point people will be able to, and they'll be comfortable doing that. But I think that right now it's going to be sort of head down into the digital community space, because it feels like that's just really what's necessary and needed right now.
What do you think about stigma broadly? So I wanted to ask you, because you're getting a lot of people that are coming to you for the first time to share about mental health or depression or anxiety or pain or rejection or loneliness. I mean, people are keeping that to themselves. They're coming to your Instagram account. They're sharing this for the rejection and loneliness for the first time. Stigma has to have played a part in why they've never shared before. And then when they open up, something probably changes in their life. So I really wanted to get your take on stigma more broadly, and what we can do about it, and how it's impacting people, especially people that are coming to your platform.
Yeah, I think that, wow, it feels like it's been a very interesting number of years around stigma. The last couple of years feel like they've really changed a lot of how people view mental health and how open people are talking about mental health. One of the things through KoreVoices is that people can choose to be anonymous if they want to. And they can put up a post and it will just have their gender and their location. And some people choose to be anonymous. But more and more, they are jumping into the comments and saying, hey, everybody, this is my story. And they'll start interacting with people, really just because they don't mind. They're okay with everybody knowing whatever it is that they're going through. And I do feel that I've seen that change. And stigma's hard. I mean, stigma is a hard thing for people to sort of open up about, because I don't know, it's just been a certain way for a long time. But I'm definitely seeing momentum, and that's really encouraging. I mean, I guess I would also just be curious to know your thoughts on that, just because I think that you've been really open about a lot of the stuff that you've been through that I, would say a lot of people might not be open about. What's been your sort of thinking around that, or your process? That would be really interesting to hear.
So a couple thoughts. My process was, I don't know how unique it was or wasn't, but my process was one where I got to a point where I really didn't have an option, honestly. Like I had to finally get honest. I had to get honest with myself. I had to get honest with people in my life. I had to get honest with the public. I had to get honest with everything. And so I was a little bit unwilling to be open and authentic and transparent when I first started on this road of recovery from addiction and dealing with bipolar disorder. But then once I did it, once I was open, once I wrote that first blog post about what I went through, man, I was overwhelmed with people reaching out positively. And then that, I guess, overcoming the stigma and being authentic and honest revolutionized my life, because I was shocked by how people reacted. And I was shocked at the support that I got. And I was shocked at the opportunities it put in front of me, because I was running around my whole life trying to hide all of my indiscretions from everyone, thinking, well, if people really knew me, I would never be able to make this money or do this thing or have this success. And then I found out that, I lost all of that because of hiding the things I was doing.
Mm.
And then what came back from it when I was authentic and honest was just so much better. And so, for me, I was forced into being honest because of my addictions. And now it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Stigma broadly. Yeah, it's interesting because I think stigma, some people say it's increasing. Some people say it's decreasing. I just have to think with all of the talking we're doing about mental health because of COVID and what we were doing before COVID started, I have to think stigma is decreasing. I mean, I see people talking about addiction and mental health on TV, celebrities, on the news, politicians, all the time. It's becoming normal to talk about it. And I think we're in the middle of a mental health and wellness revolution that looks a lot like what the 80s looked like in terms of physical fitness. And I don't think it's going to take us 30, 40 years to get to the point where everybody is working hard on their mental fitness just the way we do on our physical fitness.
Yeah, I really like the way that you just said all of that. And also, the fact that you wrote a blog post and that was like the thing that changed everything. I mean, isn't that just incredible that just in a moment, I mean, not to say that everything went away or, anything was necessarily fast, but to say that like you got that overwhelming response from people that was positive. I mean, what did that feel like, I guess? Yeah, because that's just such an interesting thing that I think so many of the people through KoreVoices would probably feel like finally, after however many years, this is their thing and they post it, this is their story, and it goes out to the world and all these people are like, you're not alone. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'd just be curious to know, like, what did that feel like for you?
It felt to me like I unlocked some secret, because I looked at social media my whole life and thought, man, all these people, their lives look so great. I have to try to do the same. And what I found out was when I raised my hand and said, dude, my life sucks right now. This is hard. Like I'm struggling. Like I've been through some shit. When I did that, the response was overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that made me realize, wow, everybody else feels the same way. I'm not the only one. And no one had to tell me that. In fact, if someone tells me that, someone says to me, you're not alone. Someone says to me, you're not the only one. Someone says to me, you're going to be okay. Just take a deep breath. Man, I hate hearing those things. But when I see someone else get vulnerable and authentic and share, and it resonates with something I've been through, something really positive happens inside of me. The way I feel happens every day in AA. It happens with support groups I'm a part of. It happens when I share it publicly on social. And to go back to your question, my first share was I put it on LinkedIn because I thought that maybe people would see it. It would stand out there. And I put it on LinkedIn. And I remember the first couple of responses I got were like, dude, I can't believe you would say that on LinkedIn. This is like a professional network. And so I'm sitting there at my house reading those first couple responses going, oh, maybe I should delete this. This was a terrible idea. And then I fell asleep or something, woke up the next day and I was just overwhelmed. I mean, people just say, man, I'm going to share my story now. Or this, you know what? I think I might need help. What rehab center did you go to? How did you do this? And then those conversations with strangers spawned a podcast, a venture fund focused on mental health. It spawned relationships that I've made in just having these conversations that are people that I talk to every day that are accountability and mental health partners of mine. I mean, just reaching out and opening up that one time drastically changed my life.
Yeah. One of the things that I oftentimes think about, and I don't know really, if there's an answer to this, but it's just like around timing for people and like, when is the time to do that? Is it that for some people, they read something like what you wrote and it gives them the sort of courage to go and do the same? Or is it oftentimes other things or just like a final event that happened or something that had happened too many times that then leads them to, I don't know, like put something out into the world? Maybe not everything, but something. I know it's just like a different process for different people, but it's something that's really interesting to me, how people decide to, as you said, become more vulnerable. It certainly for me is something that's only happened more recently. And that was like really a process for me. to kind of go through, I think learning exactly what you just said, that it does feel like a secret. I think for me, it's certainly like a work in progress, I would say. I don't think that, I'm necessarily fully there, or at times I, question, where I'm at with that. But like, I feel like that's a good place to be. And I don't know. So I guess I'm just sort of just thinking overall for people, like, how do you get started? And it's interesting kind of for somebody to read what you write and to hear what you say, but then to take action feels different. I don't know. There's not really even a question here. It's just sort of, thoughts, I guess.
My reaction to what you just said is that my personal experience was that I got to a place where I wanted to end my life, and some people in my life stepped in and stopped that. And that led me to go to rehab. And then when I was in rehab for a couple months, for the first time in my life, I was honest, I was vulnerable and transparent. And I was in a group of people who were doing the same thing. And I walked out of there feeling like, like the earth, humanity, this existence, this life was like, I had never understood it. And now I get it. Now, it wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't about being selfish and building my ego and proving that I'm the man or whatever you want to call it. That it was about letting go of all of that and being authentic and transparent with people. And when I went home from rehab and sat in my house for 3 months and didn't do anything because I didn't know what to do, I finally said, you know what? I need to be authentic. Yeah. I need to tell my story. And so I did it because that was what I knew to do, because I learned that in rehab. And when I did it, the reaction was, like I said, overwhelming. So that was my path to it. I think everyone's path might be a little bit different.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's just takes time, and for people kind of arrive at that when they're ready. I guess what's also interesting, just talking about stigma, is also kind of for me around timing. Like, I wonder, what do you think would have happened 10 years ago if you had, put that out on LinkedIn, if it existed 10 years ago, or, whatever the equivalent would have been? Do you have a read on what the reaction would have been, or if it would have been different?
Man, that's an incredible question. I want to say that it probably would have been a little bit different, but at the same time, maybe not. I don't think humans have changed that much in 10 years. I think the dialogue might have changed a little bit, but I don't think people have changed that much. I just think that people become more willing to talk about it. I think there would have still been a lot of positive reaction. I don't know, maybe I would have been fired from my job, but it's hard to say. I think that I'm more comfortable writing that now than I would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know if I changed or if society changed. I'm
not
really sure, or both.
It's interesting because one thing that I feel like I've seen through KoreVoices is that because of kind of social media, I mean, obviously there's a lot of issues around social media being toxic and addictive, and there are certainly very negative things around social media. But one of the things that I would say is incredibly positive is that at scale, I think that by having large-scale conversations around a broad host of mental health issues, and frankly, just other issues, what it does is it allows people to see other perspectives, other lifestyles, other ways of living. And I feel like more broadly, that sort of allows people to get outside of their bubble, whatever that is, and realize, oh, wow, well, okay, that's kind of more typical than I thought, whatever that thing is. And maybe I should sort of look at that differently. Maybe I should reframe how I view that. And I think that more broadly, that has just led to a lot more acceptance of people and understanding of people. And I feel like that is one of the real positives of social media in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a couple conversations on the podcast lately, and I don't think I've published all of these yet, but around this idea that people want to say, well, social media is bad because everyone's on their phone, they're not having real interactions. But I mean, I think you can get pretty authentic on social media, and I think there's a place. There's certainly a place for social media to be healthy and encouraging in interaction, vulnerability, transparency, and actually breaking the negative impacts of isolation and loneliness. So, I think that we all have to probably be really self-aware about what's healthy or not for each of us. And it probably doesn't look the same for everyone. But I don't think that social media is all bad. I think there's a lot of good there.
Yeah, I think that, there's so many accounts around positivity and encouragement. And I think for a lot of people, that has made a huge difference in their lives. So, yeah, exactly. I think that we are sort of seeing, in some cases, a changing of social media. And obviously, that's not going to be true on all accounts at all. But I do think that we are seeing kind of a future that does feel more positive, and it does feel like there is, at least in certain areas of the internet, less trolling. And to me, that's really encouraging. And I think that's like a really good way to kind of hopefully see the future of people being connected in hopefully not such a negative way.
Yeah, I saw a tweet this morning, and I was trying to find it real quick, but I can't find it right now. Somebody tweeted to unfollow, and they listed, politicians and all these people that are being divisive, and they said follow artists and thinkers and just a bunch of really more, I guess, emotionally intelligent, in touch humans, and that will change your outlook on life as your feed starts to change. And I was kind of like, yeah, that's actually really interesting. I mean, we should really be a lot more thoughtful about curating our feed, whether that's our social feed or our life feed or whatever that may be.
God, I totally agree with that. Like, that is something, just on a personal level, I have been sort of employing for a while, because it's just like, I can more or less control what comes up on my phone. And I think for a while I wasn't really thinking about it, but as I started thinking about it, I started actually, quite literally saying, well, how does this make me feel? Like, when I see a post from this person, or I see this type of content, like, how does it make me feel? And even if it's just like momentarily not exactly how I want to feel, like, do I need that? Is the content worth it? And maybe sometimes it is, maybe it's necessary at times, but I think that's just like a personal decision. But I think, yeah, you're right. Like, just to be more thoughtful, because we can control that. And I hope as well, like, that is sort of like more and more of a thing, is choosing carefully who you follow and who comes up in your feed and what you're seeing, because I really do think over time that does have an impact.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And, I see it too in myself. I mean, when I expose myself to cable news every night, or when I expose myself to Twitter, like, for instance, my Twitter feed shows me more things I really don't want to see.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, sure.
It's my own fault. But my Instagram feed doesn't. My Instagram feed shows me friends in recovery and people from church and positive things. And I feel better when I look at Instagram.
Yeah.
And that's because I curated that feed a little bit better than I curated my Twitter feed.
Sure. I love to hear that. Yeah. And it totally makes sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. So I think we need to be proactive. And I think, probably our role in talking about things like this is to get people to ask the question, am I being proactive? Like, what can I be doing about myself? Where can I get some advice? How can I get a little bit better? And I think if people start thinking that way, you're going to see mental health on the whole get better in this country and in the world. And look, we might not be able to quantify it at first, but I could just tell you from my own firsthand experiences, when I do these things, when I'm transparent, authentic, vulnerable, and when I curate the way I think, the way I talk, and what I see and what enters my ears, I feel better.
It totally makes sense. And I really love the way that you're framing this and thinking about it. And I do hope that that becomes something that over time more people do start to actually take action on, because I think these small changes can definitely make a big difference.
Well, look, man, I really appreciate you doing this. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think that I hope it'll be helpful for people. Just real quick, what's the best way for people to find you, to connect with what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. The website is KoreVoices.com. That's with a K, K-O-R-E, voices.com. And then all of the social media handles are on the website, articles, everything is basic on KoreVoices.com.
Awesome, man. Well, I will link to all of that in the show notes and put it on my website so it's easy for people to find. But man, I'm really grateful that you took the time to do this. I'm glad we got to meet, and I hope that we can find ways to work together. And thank you again for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. This was a really terrific conversation.
Another special thank you, Jesse, for coming on. And we will link to everything you mentioned here, your website, your social. We'll link to everything you heard in this podcast in the show notes and on our website. A special thank you to our guests for being here. We'd love to hear from you. We want you to reach out to us on social, on the website, over email. You can find us at stigmapodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram at Stigma Podcast, Twitter, StigmaCast. You can email us info@stigmapodcast.com. We'd really appreciate it if you liked our content, if you'd give us a like or a subscribe or a review on your platform of choice where you listen to your podcasts. As we grow our following, we're able to bring more and more mental health content. So we really do want to hear your feedback. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to talking to you soon.